The number of asylum seekers in Germany is on the rise, and Germany's federal and state governments are taking a harder stance on irregular migration. After months of disagreement, they've agreed on new financing rules for migrants and additional measures designed to limit irregular migration. Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government will now pay the states 7,500 euros per year for every asylum seeker they host. The government also pledged to develop new measures to reduce asylum applications and more quickly process new applications. The agreement was reached after marathon talks in Berlin. Julia Saudeli is our political correspondent, and she joins us now with the results of what was a marathon meeting. Julia, Chancellor Scholz and Germany's state premiers have reached an agreement. Again, the German government will pay the states for every asylum seeker. Tell us more about what they've signed up to.
Yes, a lot of the debate yesterday at this meeting and tonight had to do exactly with money. It's because the local authorities in Germany, the federal states and the municipalities are the ones that actually in practice deal with welcoming refugees in the country. So they find accommodation for them, they find spots in schools for children, and that means they also bear the cost. And this is why they really wanted the federal state to contribute more, given that they are reaching their limit in terms of caring for refugees. And they have found a compromise right in the middle between what the federal government was proposing initially and what the federal states had been asking for, which means a slight increase in money that the state is going to give to the federal states, but not enough money compared to what they had been asking for. But in general, we've seen in this agreement that the German government is going ahead with a more hardline approach to migration. They plan to also reduce benefits for asylum seekers as they wait for their asylum request to be processed. We've also seen that the German government wants to go ahead with examining the possibility of having the asylum procedures carried out in countries outside of Europe. And they also want to go ahead and close agreements with countries of origin of the migrants to make sure that they can be deported once they don't have the right to stay in Germany anymore.
As you well know, there have been numerous proposals on how to deal with migrants coming to Germany. What's the public sentiment in Germany regarding this debate?
Well, the debate is quite heated in Germany at the moment, and we see also in polls conducted recently that, for example, 44% of Germans think that the issue of migration is the most important problem that the German government has to deal with at the moment. And in other polls, we see that up to 80% of respondents find that the German government's migration policies are not good. And we see this also in the political debate. For example, a lot of criticism coming to the government from the CDU, the main conservative opposition party, but also internally within the government coalition, some parties calling for change in the migration policy. And on the other hand, the far-right AfD party has been consistently rising in the polls in the last few months. And a lot of that is driven by this migration debate, which the AfD is able to capitalize on. And that is also worrying the government at the moment.
What have you been able to glean as to what's behind this shift in Germany's stance toward migration?
Well, on the one hand, there are concrete and founded concerns about Germany's ability to properly welcome the number of refugees that are coming to the country. In the last 2 years, we've seen a high number of refugees coming from Ukraine after Russia's war against Ukraine, over 1 million people. But we've also seen in the first 6 months of this year an increase in refugees applying for asylum from other countries in the world. So there is definitely a need to look at whether Germany can invest more and handle this influx of people.
DW political correspondent Julia Saudeli, thank you. The number of unauthorized migrants arriving in the EU over the Mediterranean has tripled compared to last year. And the UN's Migration Authority says more migrants lost their lives during the crossing than at any other point in the last 6 years. Many of the migrants depart from Tunisia in hopes of reaching Italy. In July, the EU and Tunisia issued a memorandum of understanding promising more aid if Tunis cracked down on people smugglers and reduced the number of migrants making the crossing. But activists and some EU diplomats alike have criticized the plan. One of the EU's top migration officials told DW the EU needs to rethink how it has been addressing the crisis.
What do? Do we bribe every African ruler for the sake of halting migrants to attempt setting foot on Europe in the first place? Do we fly them to Rwanda, as I have heard more than once in the Council of Ministers of Justice and Home Affairs? No, that is not the right answer. The right answer is to build an architecture, which means legal certainty, binding rules, and all the links in a chain.
While EU leaders are grappling with how to manage the flow of migrants landing on Europe's shores, people smugglers in Tunisia are busier than ever. DW's Jan-Philip Scholz and Mabruka Kadir filed this report.
The ruins of an old fortress offer Mahmoud the perfect view. He says he's one of the top people smugglers on this little island of Kerkenna, and that he's taken more than 1,200 people to Europe this year already. He doesn't want to be identified and insists on being filmed while on the phone.
I have been doing this since 2011. I learned from others in the business, and things have been growing all the time. At one point, I started to make real money. A few €100 more, then a few thousand more. I love my work now.
He's on the phone all the time. The secret to his success? Quality, he says. He doesn't simply fill boats with people and send them off to their fate. He captains the boats himself. It's an expensive option for his customers.
I earn the most from foreigners. A Tunisian pays between 1,500 and 2,500 euros. But I charge foreigners, Algerians, Palestinians, Moroccans, around 4,000 euros per person.
That's too much for Mohammed and his family from Syria. A few months ago, they spent most of their money on spaces on a boat. But the Coast Guard stopped it and took the passengers to a desolate spot in the south of Tunisia.
They arrested us and first took us to Sfax and then on the Ben Gadan on the border with Libya. It was terrible. We were scared they would force us across the border to Libya.
Police officers who make such arrests seem to have changed their approach. Nowadays, they often drop people close to places where people smugglers are known to operate. Observers suggest this might be connected to the end of the migration deal with the EU. The lack of stricter policing is good news for Samba. He smuggles people out of Sousse and even rents apartments to customers while they wait for a boat. It's an open secret. Even the police know, he says.
We do business with them. They are the ones who help us. Like the security, they are the one who used to tell us the good time, what time are we going to do the work, and what's the bad time not to do it.
He specializes in moving people from West Africa to Europe. He says it's a twist of history.
We are not going there to be criminals. We just go there to change the situations, that's all. The same way when Europe and they came to Africa to take our stuffs, that's the same way we are going back there to take our stuffs again back into our country.
He says the coming weeks will probably be busy on the beaches here. Many migrants are likely to try their luck soon, before the winter turns the odds against them.
For more, I'm joined by DW Brussels correspondent Jack Parrott. Jack, the EU struck this deal with Tunisia back in July to try to prevent people leaving the country's shores and reaching Europe. But it just hasn't worked, has it?
No, it really hasn't. And this has been a massive problem. The deal's been extremely controversial. What we've seen in the since the beginning of the year is that around 250,000 people have entered the European Union illegally, which is the highest number since the year that was considered the EU's migration crisis, 2015-2016, when over 1 million people entered the European Union. Now, as you say, Tunisia accepted a sort of delegation of EU officials that arrived in July and signed with a lot of pomp and ceremony a deal, a memoranda of understanding to try to prevent smugglers from putting people on their boats to reach the European Union. The EU agreed to give Tunisia around 255 million euros to try and help with Tunisia's ailing economy. But what we've seen essentially is the deal collapse. And what we see in the report there is that the people smugglers are brazen and even saying that they're providing a service when the EU is trying, what they say, is to break up these people smuggling networks. In September, the Tunisian government wired back 60 million euros of that cash that was given to them by the European Commission. They said that that money was already part of deals that they had agreed with the EU before all of this, and that they felt they were being duped, so sent the money back. And so what we've seen is this deal kind of essentially, to all intents and purposes, fall apart. Aid organisations have been saying for a long time that these deals don't work, that the only way to try and sort this problem out and prevent deaths at sea is to provide safe and legal pathways from countries like Tunisia, but other countries as well, into the European Union, where people who want to apply for asylum can go through the process of asylum. But at the moment, we're in this sort of deadlock. And as we heard in the report, it is expected that many people will try and make their way before the winter seas come up in the next few weeks.
Why did the EU think a deal like this would work?
Yeah, that's the big question. The EU signed a deal with Turkey, a similar deal worth 6 billion euros for Turkey. And what essentially the Turkish authorities did was keep around over 3 million people in refugee camps and prevented them from leaving Turkey to enter the European Union. That deal was signed in 2016. Now, the question is, so they thought, the Europeans thought that this would work with Tunisia as well, but they're dealing with a slightly different organisation, a very different government, in fact. And it just hasn't seemed to work. The aid charities and migrant organisations have said that what they tried to do was throw money at the problem. When that deal was signed, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, the new Italian Prime Minister then, Giorgia Meloni, also went. They made a big sort of deal of it. But the Tunisians just don't feel that they have the capacity to deal with these smugglers, or they're unwilling to do so. And what we've heard widespread reports of is when they do catch the smugglers' boats in the sea, what they do is they take those boats back to the points where the smugglers' boats are leaving from. This is the Tunisian authorities. So there's just a sort of cycle of people leaving on the smugglers' boats and then re-entering the shoreline in the same place and continuing to try and make their way into the European Union.
Jack, remind us, isn't the EU trying to completely overhaul its asylum and migration policy? What's the progress on that?
Yeah, that's it. This has been a big part of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's mandate, which is coming to an end now. Essentially, what they're trying to do is force mandatory solidarity among EU countries so that countries like Italy and Greece can send migrants for their asylum to be processed in other countries. But it's still extremely politically difficult. They're trying to push it over the line before the European elections come at the end of June of 2024. So there's a long way to go on it yet.
That is Jack Perrick. Many thanks to you, Jack.